Welcome to Lunch with Tech Leaders, where we have engaging conversations about software development and cloud engineering with industry leaders and subject matter experts. These episodes are created by the Great Lakes Tech Leaders, an online community of technology practitioners. Please come join the conversation by visiting gltl.rbn.ai. Again, that's gltl.rbn.ai. Now strap in, because we're deploying to production in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Lunch with Tech Leaders. My name is Adam Oberhausen, and I'm the Director of Cloud Architecture with RightBrain Networks, and I'm your host for today. Joining me today, as always, is software and data consultant Tom Kowalski. Say hi, Tom.
Hello, howdy.
And of course, my second co-host, new to the show, is our business technology consultant, Joe Coleman. Say hi, Joe.
Hey there, everybody. Thanks for having me, Adam. Appreciate it.
No problem. So today we're going to talk about DataOps, what it is, how it came to be, what are the core concepts, best practices, and probably some other random stuff as well. So yeah, Tom, coming off your presentation at AWS Meetup, Michigan last week, that went really well.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
So congrats on that. It was a great show. But today we're here to talk about DataOps. So are you excited or no?
Yeah, I'm always excited. All these tech topics, I'm excited to talk about it. I feel like it plays right into, like we were saying, what we were talking about last week with the data-driven decisions and setting the goals and measuring those, right, with product management. So yeah, tying right along into it. How do you get that data, right? What's the pipeline for it and the operations around it? So yeah, really excited to bring on our guests here. We have Grant Allen. If you want to say hello, a little bit about yourself.
Hello. Yeah, I'm a data analyst at RightBrain Networks. I focus a lot on machine learning stuff. I've done some pretty interesting stuff with stuff like semantic segmentation.
All right. Look forward to diving into that. And then we also have a special guest here, Mark Schiebold. You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Mark Schiebold. I am a test data management engineer for General Motors. I've been in the data world for about 9 years now, seeing everything from the back end to the front end. So yeah, definitely passionate about data and excited to talk about it.
Awesome.
All right, awesome. Now, hate to interject, guys, but before we really start diving deep on this, just wanted to throw it out there to any of the live listeners or attendees. If you guys have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to throw it in the chat. I'll make sure everything gets addressed and discussed by the team.
Thanks, Joe.
All right.
So I did a little bit of research this week, Tom, and I always like to start with a history lesson, like how did DataOps come to be? So I'll start with that, and then I think we'll just go right into talking to our guests because I'm boring. But so there's there's 5 milestones that led to the emergence of DataOps, and those milestones aren't in really any order here, but you've got in the 80s and 90s is kind of when data warehousing became a thing, where companies were centralizing their data and doing their reporting off a single repository. In the early 2000s, you move on to big data explosion, and that's when companies started, newer technologies emerged, such as Hadoop and NoSQL databases to handle large volumes of unstructured data. Milestone number 3 is the emergence of cloud computing in the mid-2000s. So that made it a lot more affordable, accessible for companies to process large amounts of data. And then milestone number 4, kind of in the 2010s, you have the emergence of data science and machine learning, which led to more efficient and effective ways to manage your data and automation to support that. And then milestone number 5 kind of ties back into everything we do here, which is just DevOps. Like it's basically taking the DevOps philosophy and applying it to your data, right? So it's kind of what my research showed. So I'm not really sure exactly when like DataOps quote became a buzzword, but like it feels new to me.
Yeah, it's also interesting, right? You see DevOps, and they put it together, right? It became like a thing. What you didn't say that before, right? Is like dev and ops is like 2 separate words, but right with DataOps, you see it separated. So is it more that operation side, or is it more of a paradigm shift, philosophy, methodology, right? Like DevOps is, or are you just talking about data operations? So yeah, I love to
Yeah.
like to dive into it here.
Yeah. So the textbook definition of data ops is the practice of managing and maintaining the quality, availability, and performance of data within an organization. This includes tasks such as data ingestion, transformation, storage, access, and security. So with that, I'd like to talk to someone who's actually doing it rather than just like reading from ChatGPT. So Mark, you've been in the data field for a long, long time. Like, do you have a definition of data ops, or if that's a bad question, just kind of talk to me about like your career experience and how you got into data.
Yeah, sure. So there's definitely DevOps and data ops going on at GM right now, and they're really trying to revamp what we're doing with data at GM right now. Specifically, I just joined a new team to do test data management over at GM. This team started probably around March or April last year, and the goal is we're really trying to get high quality data for developers to work with in their lower environments, because we've seen situations where we have good prod data, but then when they develop with lower environment data, test or dev data, they don't necessarily count for everything. They don't have all the values there. There's not every situation or use case available. So they develop what they think is right. They move to production, and then someone says, "Oh, there's an issue. There's an error." And it's due to data quality, or just not having enough data in the lower environment to account for it. So I personally have experienced that myself. I've done, I was working on a report in Tableau, and it's a big high level one for C-level audiences and inside, and shows a lot of good KPIs and stuff like that. And then they tried to go run one of the calculations, and it broke. And they're like, Mark, why is this breaking? I took a deep dive into it, right? Like, looked at the SQL code and all that stuff, and realized, oh, we didn't have these, there's certain data values for this column that didn't exist in dev and test. So when they come into the prod calculations, it breaks everything. So having really good test data to work with is being, really important right now. So they're really trying to work that out. And, that's what I'm doing.
That's interesting. So what are the practices? How do you do that, right? Is it some type of machine learning, right, that you're using, to like figure out, try to make that data more real? Or how do you,
Well,
and then
so
there's the governance issue, right? Of not
there's definitely a lot of security. There's definitely a lot of security related issues. So there's what they call, personal information versus sensitive personal information. So there's two classifications of data that they use inside, and based on that, there's so many different rules surrounding it. So you have to be very careful when taking copies of production environments and moving them to the lower. So, but the big thing that we're doing right now, is data masking, because there's a lot of with this personal information, such as like IDs, names, all this other stuff. It's sensitive information that we don't want to have leaked or anything like that. So you mask it, you can shuffle it around, randomize it. There's all these different data functions you can use to manipulate the data. So it's an exact copy of prod in your lower environment, but all the values are totally mixed up. So if someone does get access to it, they couldn't do any damage.
Definitely relate to that challenge. Working at some previous companies where basically it's so easy to just take a copy of prod data and put it in a lower environment, but it's a big no. You shouldn't do that. That's kind of goes against best practice, PII, HIPAA, all the things. So, is there a tool that does all that masking like automatically, or did you have to like write a proprietary thing that like cleans your data or masks the data?
Yeah. So right now we're currently we're working with IBM, and we're using their tool called Optim. It's part of their test data, management suite. And we've been working pretty closely with them to configure it for GM use. There's a lot of things that have to be set up for the tool in order for it to work properly. So it took a little bit to get going with them, but we're up to speed now, and we went live in October.
Great. Want to give Grant a chance to chime in with a question. Grant, like in general, if I was to ask you, at a coffee shop, what is data ops? What do you think of, or how could you explain data ops to the layperson like me?
To the layperson, I would probably say, I guess not to reiterate too much. It would be the process of managing and prepping data for whatever uses you may have internally. Obviously, there's a lot more depth that goes into it, but the general gist right there.
Yeah. How about like, what are some of the core concepts of data ops? Like, what are like, I imagine there's things like governance, automation. What are some of the things that you need to kind of be aware of? Like, what are the concepts that kind of make up data ops? Mark, Alan, Grant, sorry, anyone?
On my end, where I do a lot of stuff with machine learning, I tend to focus on the usability, storing things. I'm not working so much with a lot of personal information, so I'm not as worried about the security side of things and keeping information as private and locked down. So it's a lot of like trying to figure out how can I get this data from one place to another in a reasonably effective way, in a way that preserves the information that I need. And that's largely been my focus when I do the data-driven stuff.
Yeah, interesting.
One of the big things that I've done actually is ETL and automation with ETL. So we set up a lot of these jobs and procedures. I specifically worked with IBM DataStage. So GM has a big partnership with IBM, so we use a lot of their tools. But DataStage, it's an ETL program where we can move data from source to destination, and you can do all these different changes along the way. You can manipulate it, transform it, all that good stuff. And then once these jobs are set up, you can automate them. So you can schedule them to be daily, weekly, monthly, so forth, so that all these tables or views in your database are updated automatically, and that you have current data. So you can either you can also make history tables. So every time you run these jobs, it keeps a log. It's like job was run on each Monday, and it shows that date. Or if it's just if you don't want to maintain that large of a table, you would just truncate it and replace.
Most of the
sorry, Adam. It just looks like we had a question in the chat there. Just wanted to make sure that answer didn't covered anything that this is about here. Patrick Sullivan's asking, is there an automation with that suite that pulls the data from the prod server, runs the data mask, and then pushes into the lower environments without manual intervention?
Yep, that's sort of what we're working on. So DataStage and Optim, both are two different IBM tools that we're using. DataStage is more the one that's going to be moving your data. Optim also can act as an ETL tool, but that's going to be the one that's going to be masking your data, shuffling it around, hiding it, making it more secure. The other one, DataStage, is just simply your basic data movement with some basic conversion, maybe like changing the data type from number to character, something like that.
Okay, cool. And it looks like we actually have a little bit of a follow-up on that from Brendan here. Is it common to use format preserving encryption for masking data, or is data generation more common? Is there a preferred method of these or another for seeding test data?
Yeah, so I think the question, right, is sometimes you want to use like encryption so that value, you can't tell what it is, but it stays the same across, all of your data, right? If you have different table sets, you can still do joins on them versus like other masking that just randomly does it. You lose that the ability to join tables. And
definitely with the tool that I work with, the Optim, they make a big point to maintain that referential integrity, to make sure that if we mask your primary keys, they'll still link up with your joins. So they definitely make sure you do that, because it can get pretty complex with multiple joins and stuff like that. So good question.
Question for Grant. Grant, what about AWS in terms of what do they do for ETL, and what experiences have you seen with in the AWS environment?
So AWS has a lot of options. Glue is really nice. I've been working with that recently on some internal stuff, and just I like the way that all their services kind of integrate together. I suppose it's probably not anything new for the cloud, but it's nice to be able to reference something directly into an S3 bucket for SageMaker and be able to sort of integrate these things together without having to create some massive repository that you're running everything out of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got something, Tom?
Yeah, so I got to ask, right? I'm very, very into the DevOps, right, and the team topologies, right? Making sure there's no bottlenecks, and the teams are autonomous. There's no silos. So how do you deal with that, right? Like, how are you sort of contracted out by a delivery engineering team to deal with their data, or is it? Yeah, what does that topology look like amongst teams, that hierarchy, and how do you have challenges of blocking other teams and waiting for data and things like that, and how do you deal with it? Right? What are your processes like?
I guess I could speak on a little bit of that. So we, our team, it's like I said, it was relatively new, and what we do is we sort of onboard a lot of other internal teams within General Motors. So we basically advertise our tool to a lot of different teams. Like we could do a demo presentation, and it's all internal, by the way. And we show off the tool and the capabilities, and the teams would be like, hey, we have a huge use for this, or, we might not use it. And that's actually happened where we've presented it to a team and they're like, actually, you know what, we might not need all this capability. It might be a little too much. So, but we keep presenting to different teams and seeing if they'll like it. And so we are getting some good feedback regarding that. And, as regarding the sort of hierarchy, the way that it works, I could, at least from what I'm understanding your question, we have the application owners that come to us. They ask us to say, hey, we want to use this tool. We onboard their data to our servers and, get the tool all set up. And then they start working with it, and we sort of act as, operations for it. We, if they have any questions or concerns, they'll come in and ask us. We'll help them, push them on the right track. And then, if there's anything more complicated than that, I can go to one step above me. We've got some like test data management, like experts who do some more internal facing work rather than, my team does the external application team. So that's a little bit how it works.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, it's great.
Alignment enablement versus that, top down from some other place, right? You have to do it this way, and creating that bottleneck where that data team is now responsible for all their data. And yeah, I like the.
And it's really interesting because every team has such unique data. Like it's funny, every time we work with somebody, we're finding new functions or techniques because they have different requirements for their data. They're like, oh, we have to do X, Y, and Z. We're like, oh, well, we'll have to go find a function for that. But having all this documentation handy that from IBM has been really helpful.
Nice, it's awesome. Could add to it, Grant? Do you deal with like team topologies in the? I know you're more in the consulting space, but yeah, how's it looked in things that you've dealt with? Or
I mean, a lot of the stuff I've done has been developing the AI side of things. There's been a lot of work done on like collecting data and how we can get new data for projects we're working on. And this, the thing that I've usually been working on, have been these sorts of questions that have very easy ways to make test data. And it's been a lot of like trying to figure out how to get these, how to get AWS services and working with some small teams on front end stuff to put everything together. But in terms of having these more complicated team interactions, at least not so much when I've been working with such small teams.
So, Mark, I wanted to follow up on your kind of what you said. So is there other products within GM? Like if you have this data tool and a team says, yeah, this is not the right fit for us, but maybe this other team has a tool that is the right fit, or are you guys kind of like is there centralized, like, are you the only team that's doing like this data product, or is there multiple teams that offer like a suite of data options throughout
there's
GM?
definitely a lot of different application teams. Actually, the team that I sort of, it goes up the vertical, is called Application Lifecycle Tools. So that's sort of our team name. So my manager, has a bunch of us in sort of these like sub teams that run all these different applications that help in different various ways. So like I do the we do the data masking and all that data management. There's some other teams that sort of focus on the reporting aspect of it. So it's all broken down into different roles, kind of. But there's a lot of different applications that do different things for different people, and it's not like a one size fits all for GM. So there's a lot of different things that you can use, and they could be third party like IBM or developed in house, as you mentioned earlier. We definitely have some in-house applications that were developed for it's simply just comparing data. One of the tools I used in house was they took comparing a table from prod and test. We wanted to compare, does it have exactly the same rows, or where, find out where the difference is in a certain value, because this was our sort of the legacy tool that we used before the test data management to try to figure out where our test data went wrong.
Gotcha. Question for Nicole. Hey Nicole, welcome to the show. I know you were in product management for many years, and data was always a challenge. So can you talk a little bit about there's the product data, and then it's they also want to look at the business, the sales data, the revenue data, and bring all these data sources together and make sense of it. So how does, Tom, you're a data consultant, how does an organization solve this challenge of you've got all these data sources, there's probably not well-defined resources and roles to establish all these data policies, and how do you kind of muddle your way through the challenge?
Yeah, I have struggled with that in my career as well. And I think getting to your probably ultimate point is using this information to see if we can measure what we built was successful, right? That was where I was coming from, was wanting to be able to take a roadmap item and measure it against maybe churn or MRR, ARR, and those data points are maybe in a completely different system coming out of Salesforce or coming out of your billing system. And where I'm living out of is maybe a Pendo or a Mixpanel, which is event-driven data. And so what we started to do with Pendo was to try to pull in some of that data, because it kind of allowed us to synchronize the state of the customer. Are they active? When did they cancel? What date did they cancel? And then we could start using that to measure against if the things that we were building had any effect. But it was a struggle because a lot of that is event based, and a lot of times you want to look at just the actual value of it and not know, or if it changed from canceled to active, canceled, what those events don't necessarily tell you the whole story of what they are right now in this current moment. So yeah, I guess long story short is I was trying to solve that problem by using one central source, which in our case was Pendo, and then pulling in CRM data and billing data into that so that we could kind of lay it on top of what the user was doing in the app. But I'm sure I am not the expert on that by any means. So I don't know if Tom, you wanted to add to it.
Well, no, I'm actually, interested in, what Mark has to deal with. You're talking about there's that, freedom now to choose the tools right within GM and what they're using. So what challenge do you face with the alignment, right, and bringing that data together across the tools, and integrating them?
Is there a BI tool on top of it all too? Or sorry, I don't want to derail Tom's question, but yeah, sorry.
What was the question about BI?
Is there a BI tool that is used for the product to slice and dice and visualize all the
yeah, definitely
for the data?
Yeah, so to put when you consider putting it all together, we definitely used Tableau, the reporting tool, just to display a lot of things. But also, we recently had a big partnership with Microsoft. So we're also using Microsoft Power BI. That's a huge reporting tool that I'm sure a lot of people have seen. So between the two, that's where we mainly put all the information out there. Tableau and Power BI have the capability of connecting all these different data sources that you want and displaying anything. So I've definitely had a lot of experience with that. Prepping the data from the back end and moving it all the way to the front so people can review it and make decisions.
How do you deal with the alignment of the data across the different teams, right? And making sure there's not a bottleneck of this one data person having to know every single piece of data across everything in order to make sense of it and bring it together.
Yeah, so that's a huge thing. That's a huge challenge amongst teams. I've noticed there's definitely subject matter experts, maybe like one or two people that sort of own this set of data or this area. And if they go on vacation or, for something they have an emergency, who's going to take over that data? That's definitely a huge concern. There's definitely a bottleneck like that where, if only one or two people have some control of this data. So they definitely are trying to get better at that and, account for failovers and things like that, where if one thing, if one person goes down or even a system goes down, there's another thing to replace it, or so people can keep working. So it's not just, you had a stalemate.
Yeah. Just to add to it, right? I've kind of dealt with this. That's why I'm, kind of asking.
Yeah.
And, just to add, one thing that we did is making sure that you had that shared defined schema well documented, right? So you didn't need necessarily that expert. The expert was there to translate it to this more generalized schema that anybody could look at and kind of make sense. That it solved 80% of the things, right? But sometimes you do need that specialty. But what really helped us was making that schema that was kind of shared and easily digestible by anybody that needed that data. It's interesting. Yeah, definitely a hard challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
How about we dive into some of the best practices for DataOps? Got a little short list here. I'll run through them. You guys can hit me with questions or feedback, but you're going to get started with DataOps. Here's some of the best practices you want to keep in mind. Number one, establish a data governance framework. So that's basically you want your data consistent and compliant. So it should include your policies, your procedures, your standards for data collection, storage, use, and security. Best practice number two, implement data quality management. So this is basically making sure that your data is reliable, accurate, and complete. If it's not, bad data in, bad data out. I think that's the most common thing I've seen is just people try to put the horse before the cart. No, that's put the cart before the horse. And you expect to be able to make some data-driven decisions, but if the data's crap, you're not going to be able to make any decisions. Best practice number three.
Can we jump into that? Can we jump into these?
Let's jump into it.
Asking, Grant here. So I've kind of did a little bit, dabbled in the machine learning, and the biggest challenge is the garbage data and the data engineering wrangling, right, and getting it to kind of all fit together to what you actually need to run these models on. What challenges have you had with that, or what tools help, or what the governance side of it, making sure it's good?
Yeah, that is 100% true. You need good data to get good models. Oftentimes, that's the hardest aspect of it. And when building out an AI model, oftentimes what it comes down to in the end is there's only so much you can do and so much you can play around with on the machine learning side, on the processing of your data to get better and better results. And so you need to have a good way to get your data in. You want to make sure you're not losing information when you take your data and put it where you need it to be and transform it into the formats you need it to be. That's probably the thing I'm looking out for the most when I'm doing anything with data. Is I'm want to make sure I'm not losing information. I'm trying to be meticulous and not break things, because there's another big concern that you don't want to have a situation where you lose a bunch of really important information for your project, or it just doesn't get recorded, and then you have this mess that can't be all that useful in your end product. And so that's definitely been the biggest.
Sounds like
Yeah.
what you're saying with machine learning, Grant. It's like you have to. There's going to be an acceptable tolerance of like it's only going to get so far. Like it's not going to, it's not going to be 100% the model or whatever the prediction is, right? You have to say what are we trying to get it to? I'm just thinking about Evercare. It's this machine learning program Grant wrote to kind of like analyze lawns and predict how much mowable space is in a lawn. And so like we're using like satellite images that are like kind of grainy, right? Or like they're not perfect. So it's like you have to like the data that we're putting into it isn't high res. So we have to know like, well, we're best we can do is like 90% accuracy, right? And is that good enough for the target market, the target industry that we're trying to sell this thing to, right?
Yeah, and there's a big challenge in this sort of thing where you need to find a way to get what you need for the best available price point, and be able to use it. But these sorts of projects, especially with image processing, requires so much data that it can become somewhat prohibitive. However, like I try to aim for certain benchmarks of, well, like Adam said, what's the sort of good enough mark, and what's the like what can we do with what we have? And so a lot of, obviously verifying quality and playing around with a lot of input parameters can get you that little bit of extra help. But it's a lot of getting the data to do what you want, and crossing a certain baseline threshold there.
All right, best practice number 3, automate data management processes. Seems like a no-brainer, right? Automation is good. Automation kind of falls in line with DevOps. Anytime you're doing manual things, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to forget things, so it makes a lot of sense. Best practice for DataOps number 4 is foster collaboration across teams. We did talk a lot about that today already, where it seems like that's almost, it's really important, for any organization. I really like the way GM does it, the way you explain, Mark, where you guys are kind of like going door to door selling your product, and you can either buy it or not buy it. So that's pretty cool.
And also just to add to the collaboration, right, with DevOps and kind of that mindset that I really like to see that kind of changed was getting, thinking about architecture, the cost of things, how things are going to be tested before things are built, right? And collaborating with teams, and what, before we even build this, what data tool are we thinking? And then, so along with that, thinking about what data we might need and making sure we're recording that before we even build that tool, right? Talking to those experts and making sure ahead of time, that collaboration.
Best practice number 5, monitor and improve data performance. So again, kind of falls in line with the DevOps philosophy, continuous improvement. Always looking for ways to monitor your data quality, how the performance of it, like how quickly can I access it, right? If you have to, if you need data and you can't, if it's cumbersome to get to it, right, that's not a good process. So and then the last, rounding out the best practices, is implement data security and compliance. So this is essential to protect the data. We talked a little bit about PII and lower environments and things like that. So kind of ties back into the governance framework we talked as the first best practice, but just, you can have mechanisms to monitor your compliance, right? I know there's things in like S3 Grant that can like look through your S3 buckets for PII and, send out the alarms and things like that. I'm sure IBM has some pretty cool tools to help you with compliance as well. Is there anything special you guys are doing with compliance and your stuff, Mark?
Oh yeah, that's huge. So we have this internal system that we use for measuring things like that. I'm not sure if I can actually share what we call it, but I can give you sort of a little info of what we do. Basically, is you're checking to see if you're technology compliant. Are you using the latest version of your software? Is that tool accepted by GM? You got to have security compliance. Are you meeting all the security rules? Is your data compliant with any local, state, federal, there's all these so many different security rules, stuff like that. Do you have your business continuity? Like I mentioned earlier, a failover. Like if one server goes down, do you have another server that could come up if it goes down? Is your tool and your data in the right area? Like there's certain spaces in a database or a server that if you're not under your organization's umbrella, so to say, you're not compliant. So you got to move it into the right area. And so yeah, there's a ton of different measures for compliance that we use. Yep.
They make it. Do they make it streamlined, or is it pretty cumbersome?
At first, it's pretty cumbersome, just because they just want to make sure you have everything. But once if you basically get all your your thumbs up, for all those areas, then you're pretty much just in maintenance mode at that point, just making sure you're still compliant, doing your yearly checkups, or however often you have to check up on things. You make sure your certificates are still valid. Just stuff like that, just staying up to date on things. But the initial assessment is pretty cumbersome, but after that, like I said, it's fine.
Awesome. Well, we're getting close to being at time here. I want to respect everyone's work day. Any final thoughts from the panel here before I close it out?
No, just thanks for having me on. I love talking about data, so I'm happy to share all this information. And yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot to
Thank you.
Grant and Mark, Nicole for joining today. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules. And thanks to the listeners for tuning in today, the audience for showing up. Hope you enjoyed the conversation and thought it was fun and informative. Love to have everyone join us again next week. We're going to be talking about AWS tagging strategies. Very exciting.
Oh yeah.
I know Joe's real excited for that one. So thanks again, everyone. This concludes our show. Lunch is over, so get back to work.